My name is Emily Carter, and last Saturday at my cousin's wedding, I was seated at the kids' table between a toddler who was licking ketchup off a plastic spoon and a 10-year-old who kept asking if I had any games on my phone. And the worst part? No one saw a problem with it. No one flinched when I walked across the ballroom in heels and a silk dress, only to be pointed toward a table that had crayons instead of cutlery. No one said, "Wait, Emily's not a child." Because in their eyes, I still was. Not young, not literally, but less than. Always less than. I sat down without a word. I smiled like it didn't sting. I opened a juice box like it was champagne. Across the hall, my parents were seated near the stage, laughing with my sister Madison. She looked stunning, all white teeth and confidence, in a backless gown that probably cost more than my flight home. She glanced at me once, smirked, and turned back to her reflection in the selfie camera. That's always been the story. I don't exist unless she needs contrast. Unless someone has to be the smart but awkward one, the one who never quite made it to the spotlight. To everyone else at that wedding, I was Emily, the quiet one, the one who never really fit in, the one who didn't come back home much. Never mind that I run my own consulting firm now. Never mind that I built it from nothing while living in a shared apartment and eating peanut butter sandwiches 5 nights a week. Never mind that I employ 12 people, 5 of them single moms who couldn't find jobs after the pandemic. None of that mattered. Not to them. To them, I was still the girl who didn't wear enough makeup. The one who didn't flirt with the right boys. The one who didn't post graduation photos on Instagram. My name wasn't even on the printed program, but Madison's was 3 times. Maid of honor, planner, reader of the opening speech. When the photographer asked for the whole family to come together for a portrait, no one called my name. Not my mother, not my father, not even my brother, who I used to help with his homework when our parents forgot he had spelling tests. I stayed seated, next to the crayons, pretending I didn't notice the shame rising up my throat like a slow, acidic tide. And then something changed. Someone walked in. Late. Quietly. Wearing a tailored black suit and a look that said he already knew where I'd be seated. My husband. I hadn't told them he was coming. I didn't want him to see this part of me. The part that still shrank under fluorescent lights and fake smiles. The part that still longed for a family that didn't treat me like I was optional. But he saw it anyway. He walked over, gently kissed my cheek, and sat down beside me, folding himself awkwardly into one of the tiny plastic chairs without a word. He looked at the place card on the table. It said Emily Carter, Children's Section. He turned it over. Then he looked up. Calm. Sharp. And I knew, without him saying a word, that something was about to shift. I didn't know how. I just knew he wouldn't let this slide. Not today. To understand why it mattered so much, why I froze the second Sam touched that place card, you need to understand what it means to be the daughter no one sees. Not abused. Not neglected in the ways that make the news. But softly erased, in moments so small they don't leave bruises, just echoes. That was me. Emily Carter, second born, second thought. Madison's little sister. The quiet one. Madison, my older sister, was everything a daughter was supposed to be in my family's eyes. Golden hair. A smile that could charm priests and bouncers alike. She was the kind of girl people made allowances for. The kind who forgot homework and still got A's. The kind who dropped out of dance class, got reinstated, and somehow got cast as the lead. She was beautiful and loud and chaotic, and, by some miracle, always forgiven. Me? I was a planner. I followed instructions. I was the first to clean up, the last to speak, the one who made straight A's without being asked. I never needed help, so I never got it. I never made waves, so no one noticed I was drowning. I don't think my parents meant to make me invisible. They were just busy, always attending to Madison's broken hearts, missed deadlines, personal dramas. When I came home with a trophy from the regional science fair in 6th grade, my dad blinked and said, "Didn't Madison just get her braces off today?" I said, "Yes," and put the trophy on my bookshelf. No one ever asked where I kept it. I learned not to expect celebration, not for small things, and not for the big ones either. When I got accepted into MIT with a full scholarship, the email came in while I was setting the table for dinner. I screamed. I cried. I danced in the kitchen, holding my phone like a winning lottery ticket. My mom looked up from marinating chicken and said, "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. Could you grab the forks?" That night, Madison announced she'd been offered a modeling contract from a regional agency that turned out to be a scam. They talked about it for hours. My achievement was a single sentence in passing. I didn't even mention it again. By the time I moved out for college, I was used to being alone. I liked it, actually. Solitude gave me clarity. I studied engineering, learned Python, ran data analytics for local startups. I fell in love with systems, logic processes. Things that had rules. Things that didn't forget you. And I worked. Not just for grades, but for the kind of freedom I didn't know I needed until I had it. My professors loved me. My classmates respected me. Recruiters started emailing before I even graduated. Meanwhile, Madison flitted from one internship to another. She dated men with money and ambition, hoping to marry into a lifestyle she hadn't built. When it didn't work out, when they ghosted her or cheated, my parents always said, "She just hasn't met the right one yet." They never asked if I had. I dated quietly, carefully. And then, one day, I met Sam at a leadership conference in Chicago in a workshop titled Scaling Growth Sustainably. He was presenting a case study on AI-powered logistics. I was taking notes. He stayed after to answer my questions. I stayed to ask more. We had coffee, then dinner, then 10,000 little moments that added up to something I'd never experienced before, being seen. Sam didn't care that I wasn't flashy. He liked that I was steady, curious, strategic. He said I listened like a scientist. I told him he thought like an orchestra. We got married in a quiet courthouse ceremony after 2 years of long-distance love and late-night FaceTimes. We wore navy. We signed papers. We kissed under gray skies and celebrated with tacos. I didn't tell my family until 3 months later. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want them to ruin it. When I did tell them over dinner, 3 courses in, my mom blinked and said, "You eloped. Without a dress? What will people say?" Madison said, "Wait, wasn't he the tech guy? The one from that supply chain thing?" I said, "Yeah. He's the CEO now." She nodded like she hadn't heard me. Then she turned to my dad and asked if he remembered to call the caterer for her birthday brunch. And that was that. Not even a congratulations. Not a card. Not a text. Just silence, like it didn't register. Like it didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. But Sam? He made up for it in 1,000 tiny ways. He took my hand every time I second-guessed myself. He stayed up late proofreading my pitch decks. He asked about my dreams and helped me chart the map to them. By the time my cousin Anna's wedding invitation arrived, I had no intention of going. But Sam looked at me and said, "Do you want to go?" I said, "Not really." He said, "Then don't." I laughed. Then I opened the envelope. No +1. Just my name.
Typed.
Not handwritten. Not even spelled right. I said, "They don't want me there." He said, "Then we go anyway." I said, "Sam," he looked at me, really looked at me and said, "No one gets to shrink you anymore. Not even your family." So we booked the flight. He had a business meeting that morning, so he told me he'd arrive late, change into a suit and meet me there. And I believed him. I just didn't realize what he meant when he said, "I'll make it count." By the time I turned 25, I had stopped waiting for my family to applaud. I stopped sending them updates, stopped forwarding links to my published articles, stopped expecting them to ask how my startup was doing. And when I stopped giving them access to the version of me they had always minimized, something incredible happened. I started to rise. Not in the dramatic, overnight success kind of way, but in the quiet, intentional kind of way that builds empires without noise. It started with a consulting contract for a small supply chain tech firm in Boston. Just me, working out of a studio apartment with a whiteboard and a single folding chair. I worked 16-hour days. I ran audits, designed automation systems, and built predictive models that cut their operational costs by 27% in the first quarter. They called me a miracle. I called it Tuesday. One contract turned into three. Three turned into a roster. Before long, I was turning down offers because I didn't have the bandwidth. I hired an assistant, then a junior analyst, then a full-stack developer. By 27, I was running a boutique consultancy with 6 full-time employees and a wait list of clients from 3 countries. But I didn't post about it, didn't tell my family, didn't bring it up at the holidays, because I knew how it would go. Madison would blink and say, "That's cool," before launching into her story about an influencer she met at a music festival. My parents would nod vaguely, then ask if I had time to help them set up their new printer. I didn't need their validation anymore. But that didn't mean I didn't still feel the sting of its absence. The only person who truly knew the scope of what I was building, who actually saw it, named it, honored it, was Sam. We met at that leadership conference, yes. But our connection didn't feel like networking. It felt like recognition. He was brilliant, but calm. Sharp, analytical, but never boastful. He asked questions no one else did. Not just, "What do you do?" but, "What problem are you secretly solving for everyone else?" We dated long distance for a while. He lived in Austin, I was still in Boston. But he visited every month. We talked every night. And when we weren't talking about the future, we were building it. He was launching his second logistics tech startup at the time, leaner, smarter, more ethically grounded than his first. I offered to help with some of the back-end systems for free. He said no. "You bill like the expert you are," he said. "That's the only way people will ever treat you like one." That was the first time a man looked me in the eye and said, "Don't shrink." We fell in love, not just with each other, but with who we both became when we were together. With Sam, I didn't feel like the smart sister, or the one who lives far away. I felt like a woman fully in command of her future, respected, chosen, centered. We got married quietly. A courthouse ceremony. 2 witnesses. 1 kiss. No drama. My family never asked why they weren't invited. To be honest, I don't think they even remembered what city I lived in at that point. We spent our honeymoon working out of a co-working space in Lisbon, building out a grant proposal for a social enterprise accelerator that we co-founded 6 months later. While Madison was still posting filtered birthday brunches and shopping hauls, I was pitching to investors in Singapore, closing licensing deals in Dubai, and onboarding 5-figure retainers from clients I used to only dream of. But the success wasn't the part that mattered. The peace was. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to prove anything. Not to my parents. Not to Madison. Not to the ghost of the girl I used to be. I was just living. And I was finally happy. That's why I almost didn't go to the wedding. When the invite arrived, it was addressed to Emily Carter, guest optional. Not Emily and Sam. Not Mrs. Carter. Just optional. Like I was an afterthought. Like I was still 12 years old and sitting on the floor, eating off a paper plate. I tossed the envelope in the trash. Sam pulled it back out. "Want to go?" he asked. "No, need to go?" "No, but if we do go," he said, "we go on your terms." I looked at him, standing there in our kitchen, barefoot, coffee in one hand, contract in the other, and felt something settle in my chest. Not fire. Not anger. Just clarity. I didn't owe them anything, but I owed myself the right to be seen. Not for them, but for the girl I used to be. The one who smiled through every family dinner while her sister got praised for bringing store-bought cupcakes. So I agreed. We booked separate flights. Sam had a business meeting that morning, and I didn't want to explain his absence if he arrived late. I didn't tell anyone he was coming, because I knew my family, and I wanted them to show me exactly who they still thought I was before I reminded them who I had become. The wedding was beautiful. White orchids draped from every archway. Crystal centerpieces glittered under chandeliers the size of small cars. The music was soft, the lighting warm, and the air thick with expensive perfume and family politics. I arrived early. Alone. Madison was already there, of course. Laughing with the cousins, adjusting someone's makeup, bossing around the florist like she owned the place. She looked like she belonged in a magazine. I didn't expect a warm welcome, but I didn't expect what came next either. A distant aunt, I don't even know her name, spotted me at the entrance, smiled vaguely, and pointed toward the back of the ballroom. "There should be a seat for you over there," she said. "With the little ones." I froze. "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She leaned in like she was doing me a favor. "It's just easier. They had to reorganize last minute, and you're technically not part of the immediate family. You understand." I didn't understand, but I nodded anyway. Because what else was I supposed to do? Make a scene? Beg for respect. So I walked. Past rows of white-cushioned Chiavari chairs. Past elegantly set tables labeled bride's family, groom's friends, VIP guests. All the way to the far corner. The kids' table. Bright blue plastic. Cartoon napkins. A bowl of mixed crackers. 2 teenagers scrolling TikTok. A toddler drinking out of a sippy cup. That's where they put me. Emily Carter. 30 years old. Married. Business owner. Seated between a 6-year-old with light-up shoes and a preteen who asked if I was somebody's nanny. I sat down. Carefully. Adjusted my dress so it wouldn't touch the fruit punch spill already soaking through the tablecloth. Across the hall, my mother made eye contact with me, and then turned away. Not a smile. Not a gesture. Nothing. It was strategic. Madison caught my eye too. She was sitting at the head table, of course. Her boyfriend beside her. She looked at me and smirked. That smirk, that same smug little twist she used to flash at me across our childhood bedroom when I wasn't invited to someone's sleepover, it hit harder than it should have. Because I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd shown up. I'd dressed with care. But still, I was seated with the children. I stared down at my place card, crookedly taped to the table, and felt the heat crawl up my neck. I was 30. Married. I'd raised funding. Built systems. Created jobs. And they still saw me as a placeholder. As less. For a second, I thought about getting up, leaving quietly, slipping out the side door and calling Sam, telling him not to come. But then I heard a voice. Not loud, not angry,
Just calm.
measured.
Familiar.
Excuse me, everyone. I looked up, and there he was,
Sam.
standing in the middle of the ballroom, in a black tuxedo, tie straight, hair slightly wind-tousled from the breeze, looking directly at me, and then at them. He walked over,
Slowly.
pulled out a regular chair from a nearby table and set it beside me. Then he sat down,
Casually.
like he belonged there, because he did. He picked up my juice box, raised it like a wine glass, and smiled. And that's when I knew he wasn't going to stay quiet.
Not this time.
The thing about Sam is he's not flashy. He's quiet, measured, the kind of man who listens first, speaks second, and only if he has something that actually matters to say. So when he pulled his chair next to mine at the kids' table, smiled, and took a sip from my juice box like it was a crystal tumbler of aged scotch, I knew something was coming. But I didn't expect this. It happened during the toasts. Anna's best friend went first, emotional, funny, a little drunk. Then the groom's brother, stiff, overly rehearsed, forgettable. And then came the open mic. Madison stood up, of course. She loved microphones more than she loved air. She launched into some generic, preformative speech about family being everything, and knowing Anna since before she could walk.
People clapped.
My parents looked proud. Madison looked smug. Then, just as the MC was about to close out the segment, a calm voice spoke from the back of the room. "Excuse me," Sam said, standing slowly. "May I say something?" The MC, a little caught off guard, nodded. "Of course. Come on up." A few people whispered. Most didn't know who he was. He didn't announce himself. Didn't take the mic with a dramatic flourish. He just walked up there like he belonged, like he wasn't walking into a room full of people who had just treated his wife like an afterthought. He cleared his throat. "My name is Sam Carter," he said. "Some of you may not know me. That's okay. I wasn't really expected." A few polite chuckles. He smiled. "But I wanted to say a few words, not about the bride and groom, though they look beautiful, but about the woman sitting over there." Every eye turned toward me. I felt my stomach twist. Sam continued. "You seated her at the children's table." Dead silence. He let the words hang in the air, heavy, undeniable, sharp. "Which is fine, I suppose," he said, smiling again. "I'm sure it was a logistics thing. These events are hard to coordinate." Another polite laugh, thin, nervous. "But I want to tell you what you may not know about that woman," he said, nodding in my direction. "Because while she may not have a title in this wedding, and her name might not have made it onto the program, she's the reason 3 local businesses survived the pandemic." Murmurs. "She's the founder of an automation consultancy that just signed its first multinational client 2 weeks ago. She's built job pipelines for women in underfunded communities. She speaks at conferences you need a clearance badge to get into." Now, they were listening. My father sat stiffly. My mother blinked rapidly. Madison looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Sam paused, then looked straight at Madison. "I heard someone say once that Emily was just quiet, that she never quite stood out. And that might be true, if you only measure worth in volume." He turned back to the room. "But if you measure worth in impact, in grit, in what someone builds quietly, in the dark, without asking for credit." He looked right at me. "Then Emily Carter is the most powerful woman I've ever met." Silence. You could hear forks hitting plates. He held the mic loosely in one hand and finished with a calm smile. So wherever she sits, whether it's with kids or kings, just know she built her own table. And I'm proud, honored, to sit beside her. The room was still. For a full 3 seconds, no one moved. Then someone, I think one of the groom's cousins, started clapping.
Slow. Loud. Certain.
Then another. And another. And suddenly, the room, the same one that had seated me with juice boxes and paper napkins, was standing, applauding. Not for Sam.
For me.
I didn't cry. Not then. I just looked at him, this man who didn't need to shout to be heard, and mouthed, "Thank you." He smiled, walked back across the ballroom,
Pulled his chair beside mine.
and took my hand like it had always belonged there. Flashback moment. As they moved into dessert, I sat there in silence. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I didn't need to say anything at all. I thought of all the years I'd spent minimizing myself to make others comfortable. Of the dinners I'd helped plan but never been thanked for. The birthdays forgotten. The wins dismissed. And I thought of the 12-year-old girl who once cried in a school bathroom because her parents missed her science fair, again. That girl didn't know how powerful she'd become. Didn't know she'd build a life that didn't need anyone's permission. Didn't know she'd marry a man who would stand beside her in the most literal, unwavering sense. I wish she could have seen this night, because it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. As Sam sat back down beside me, the applause still soft in the background, something strange happened. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. Not right away. I felt still, like my body had stopped vibrating from all the years it spent trying to earn a chair at the table. Like I'd finally stepped off a treadmill I didn't realize I'd been sprinting on for most of my life. His words echoed in my chest. The room moved on. Champagne flowed. Music started again. The MC made some awkward joke, but I stayed in that moment. And in that stillness, everything came flooding back. I remembered the summer I turned 13. Madison had just won some local pageant. Nothing big, but it felt like royalty in our house. There was a crown, a sash, a cake with her face printed in icing. That same week, I won a district-wide robotics competition. My team designed a mechanical arm that could pick up glass without shattering it. I came home with a plaque.
No one asked to see it.
No one even asked what we built. I put it on the shelf next to my books and didn't mention it again. That was the first time I realized, in my house, achievement wasn't celebrated unless it sparkled. I remembered senior year of high school. Madison wrecked her car. My parents were frantic. She'd hit a curb, burst a tire, bruised her wrist. While she recovered on the couch, I got accepted into 5 top-tier universities, including MIT. I told them one evening while we were eating Chinese takeout. My mom was folding napkins. My dad was watching the news. "Congratulations," they said, without looking up. I cleared the plates that night, wondering what it would take for them to see me. I remembered the first time I got rejected from something I truly wanted, a dream internship at a company I'd admired since college. It crushed me. I called my mom, just for comfort. She answered, distracted, then said, "You're smart. I'm sure you'll find something else." Then she added, "Did you hear? Madison's dating someone who owns a boat." That was the last time I called home when I was in pain. But for every dismissal, every shrug, something else happened too. I got sharper. Not colder. Not harder. Just more focused. I learned how to redirect energy. Instead of asking why they couldn't see me, I asked myself where I wanted to go next. Instead of proving my worth to people who refused to recognize it, I started proving it to myself, quietly, relentlessly. I read business books during lunch breaks. I studied public speaking on YouTube until 3 a.m. I taught myself how to pitch, how to price, how to say, that number doesn't work for me. And when I messed up, when I sent the wrong invoice or let imposter syndrome creep in, I fixed it.
Alone.
Not because I wanted to be alone, but because I learned to become the person I needed when I was younger. I remembered one specific winter. Boston was frozen solid. My heater broke. My clients were late paying their invoices. My rent was overdue. I had $15 in my checking account. I sat on the floor, wrapped in 2 hoodies and a blanket, typing up a proposal I knew might not land. I remember thinking, no one's coming to save me, and then immediately thinking, good. I know exactly how to save myself. That proposal landed. So did the next 4. I didn't just survive that winter. I built from it. That was the same month I met Sam. When we first started dating, I downplayed everything. I didn't want him to think I was too intense or too work-obsessed. He saw through it immediately. One night over dinner, he asked me to tell him the real version of my story. I hesitated. Then I told him about the science fairs, the silent wins, the forgotten moments, the rejection, the nights I cried into spreadsheets. He didn't flinch. When I finished, he said, "You're a machine built from empathy. Do you even realize what that means?" I laughed. Sounds like a contradiction. He said, "No, it's a blueprint for leadership." That was the moment I fell in love with him. Because he didn't want to rescue me. He wanted to stand next to me. And he has, through every late night launch, every burnout cycle, every investor pitch, every difficult client call. He reminds me when to rest, when to charge more, when to stop accepting scraps from people who couldn't carry half my weight. That's what made his toast so powerful. It wasn't just a speech. It was a mirror held up to a room that had never bothered to look directly at me. It was a declaration from a man who'd seen every inch of the journey, not just the highlight reel. He didn't do it to embarrass them. He did it to honor the version of me that never asked for applause, but deeply deserved it. As I sat there, hand in his, I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel like the little girl sitting on the steps outside the family party. I didn't feel like the forgotten sister or the overlooked daughter. I felt known, not in the way that demands attention, in the way that roots you, because I had built something, not just a company, but a life with integrity, with people who saw me, with values that didn't shift based on who was clapping. And no one could take that away, not even the people who once taught me I didn't matter. This is how I got here. Not through luck. Not through marriage. Not because someone finally believed in me, but because I decided I was worthy before anyone else did. And because I stayed worthy, even when no one noticed. The applause faded slowly. People weren't sure what to do with it. Some clapped because it felt appropriate. Others didn't move at all, like if they stayed still long enough, they could pretend it hadn't happened. I didn't move either. Not out of fear, but because I wanted to feel the silence. For the first time in my life, that silence didn't feel like erasure. It felt like power. I looked around the room. My father's jaw was tight. He was staring straight ahead, like someone had just read his tax returns out loud. My mother was dabbing the corner of her eye, though I couldn't tell if it was pride or embarrassment. Maybe both. My sister Madison? She wasn't looking at me at all. She was staring down at her wine glass, swirling it in slow, angry circles. No one said anything.
No one had to.
Because the message had already been delivered. You don't get to define me anymore.
Not by where you seat me.
Not by what you forget. Not by what you choose to acknowledge or ignore. You had your chance. You had years of chances.
And now?
Now you don't get to decide who I am to this family or to myself. After the speeches, people started moving again. Waiters returned with dessert trays. The band started tuning up. Life tried to resume. But I could feel the shift.
It wasn't just about me.
It was about every invisible woman in that room who'd been asked to shrink so someone else could shine. I saw it in the way a second cousin approached me quietly and said, "I never knew what you did."
I'm sorry.
I saw it in the way Anna, the bride, hugged me tight, like an apology. And I saw it in the way Sam looked at me, not like a man who defended his wife, but like a man who'd simply spoken the truth out loud in front of the people who needed to hear it. Madison finally approached me, not with an apology, that would have been too direct. She sat across from me during dessert and said, "That was quite a performance." I smiled. It wasn't a performance. It was a correction. She blinked. Then she tried again. "So your company, it's real?" "I have 12 employees," I said calmly, "and a wait list." She went quiet. "Then you should have told me." I tilted my head. "I tried," I said, "years ago." And I stood up, not angrily, not triumphantly, just with peace. Because I wasn't trying to win anymore. I'd already won. By building a life they couldn't diminish, and by refusing to ask them to clap for it. As the night wore on, we stayed a little longer, took a few photos, hugged the people who mattered, ignored the ones who didn't. When Sam and I finally walked out of the ballroom, hand in hand, I didn't look back. Because the girl who would have looked back, searching for one last nod of approval, was gone. In her place stood a woman who didn't need validation from a table that never made space for her. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming across the hotel sheets and the scent of fresh coffee on the nightstand. Sam was already dressed, sitting in the lounge chair by the window, laptop open, phone on silent. He looked up and smiled. "Morning, CEO." I laughed softly. "Is that my new title now?" "It always was," he said. "They just didn't know it." I sat up slowly, letting the weight of the night before settle in. Not the drama, not the confrontation, but the release. The deep, unshakable stillness that comes from finally understanding you don't owe anyone a performance just to be seen. I thought about the younger version of me, the one who used to rehearse family updates in her head before every holiday, hoping this time they'd ask follow-up questions. The one who used to shrink in chairs, in conversations, in pictures, trying not to take up more space than they thought she deserved.
She was gone now.
Not with a bang, not with a speech, but with a decision. The decision to stop performing, to stop chasing applause from people who only clap when it's convenient. And in her place stood me, Emily Carter,
Wife.
founder, builder,
Loved. Seen.
chosen not by blood, but by someone who chose to stay in the hard parts, the quiet parts, the becoming. We spent the morning walking through the city. No plans, no emails, just sunshine, sneakers, and the quiet confidence of people who no longer needed to prove anything. At brunch, Sam looked up from his coffee and said, "You know you don't ever have to go back there, right?" I nodded. "I might," I said. "One day, if I want to." He raised an eyebrow. "But not to be seen," I added. "Just to be kind. On my terms." He smiled again, that knowing, steady smile that said he'd follow my lead either way. A week later, I got a text from my mother. "Heard your speech made an impression. Maybe we can talk sometime." I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because for the first time I wasn't waiting. I wasn't desperate for connection. I wasn't hoping this would be the moment they'd finally see me. I wasn't clinging to the idea of family like it was something owed to me. I was whole, with or without their acknowledgement. I replied simply, I'm open to a conversation, but I'm no longer available for being diminished. No reply, and that was okay, because I had chosen something better than legacy. I had chosen peace. That fall, I gave a keynote at a Women in Tech Summit. There were 500 people in the audience. I opened with this. For years, I waited to be invited to the table, until I realized I could build my own. And now I make sure it is chairs for women who've been overlooked, underestimated, and told they were too much or not enough, depending on who is speaking. The applause came like thunder, but it wasn't the clapping that mattered. It was the eyes in the front row, lit up with recognition, reflection, reverence. Women who saw themselves in my words, who knew the sting of being seated at the kids' table, who were ready to outgrow it forever. That's the thing about poetic justice. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers back your own name, fully, finally, after years of silence. And when it does, you don't need to scream. You just need to stand up, walk out, and never shrink again.